Hello and welcome to another episode of Talk'n TRM, the podcast dedicated to travel risk management. My name is Bex Deadman, also known as Travel Risk Bex. And today I am joined by a new friend. You know how I like to talk to different people that I've met across the industry, and this particular person I've met this year. I'm going to do a shout out to LinkedIn because it is good at connecting people, and it was all over a particular post that she wrote, which really resonated with some of the work that we do, and I wanted to reach out to her and find out more about what she was up to. So and then we got to meet in person too, which was really nice at the Business Travel Show. So and then we've been doing various different things. So we will talk about all of that in the next few minutes. But if I could, if you don't mind, ask you, who are you and what do you do?
Yep. Lovely to see you again, Bex. I'm Jade. I'm founder of We Move Travel, and what we're doing is addressing travel risk management for both individual solo travelers and business travelers from the perspective that safety looks different for different demographics of people. So it's kind of creating a little bit more depth around risk management rather than the one size fits all default that I've found, in the industry as much so far.
Let's get into that immediately because it's so, right. Everyone is listening going, now I know why she's on the call. Absolutely. So this is a subject that we talk about a lot, that it's very easy to have this kind of blanket approach to not just travel risk management, but kind of anything that's policy driven or compliance driven. And we're not then necessarily thinking about the people that it's aimed for. There is nothing more important, I don't think. Well, there are others that are equally as important. But when it comes to travel risk management, this is the time that we need to get it right. And we need to recognize that different people will have different biases coming into it, but different issues, different experiences to do with their sexuality, to do where they come from, to do with their gender, to do with their experience of the role, to do with their past experiences, to do with their fears and anxieties. It's massive, isn't it? It's this huge thing. And you're so right. Generally, and let's call it out, a lot of policies where they exist are generally written for maybe an exec in a company who is probably the least risk adverse, willing to set up a company and do all of those crazy things that founders do. And it's not necessarily kind of aiming it in the way that it should be. So I can see that you recognize this. And this is why, obviously, I was just like, oh, my goodness, let's have some conversations around this. So how are you going to help? And are you aiming this at everyone? Are you aiming this at corporate? What does this look like for you? What does the future look like?
Yeah, so for us, it sits in three sort of different streams, but I think it's something that impacts the travel industry as a whole. I mean, I could talk about gaps in data bias, various things for hours. That's not why we're here.
We can, don't you worry. But yes, I'm keep going.
But we have really specific use cases. So for solo female travelers, I think, hugely impacted market. So working on a product there, 64% of the global travel market are women, drive 82% of travel decisions, and yet we don't have all of the information that we need whilst looking to travel to help ourselves feel safe and sort of manage that risk. It's not necessarily about stopping people from doing things, but it's more around empowerment, being able to make informed decisions by having the information that you need that's specific to you. So that's kind of one space, but the applications of the technology actually go across quite a lot of spaces. So we're looking at business travel. We've got, application for TMCs and also the travelers themselves and sort of risk managers as well, because I think the difficulty with what happens at the moment is that if you don't fit within the sort of default box of traveler, I guess the impetus is on you to then kind of put that information across in terms of what you need, what you might not need, what others maybe haven't considered about what your experience might look like. So for me, as a Black woman, the impetus is on me in a situation where I'd be traveling for business in an organization to then give that information to a manager, to a risk manager, to my direct line manager, and reach out. And I mean, I'm, pretty forthright. I speak up quite a lot, but, a lot of people maybe don't feel quite as confident as I do to say, actually, look, I can't go to Russia because for me, that's not quite as safe as it is for you. And I really just think that decision or that not the decision, but the impetus should not be on the traveller in that situation where, organisations are claiming duty of care, TMCs are claiming duty of care. You really need to understand what the individuals need in that situation to be able to say, yes, we can provide that duty of care. That's my perspective on it.
I completely am with you. And it's just such an important area. It's an area that organisations, though, seem a bit scared to get into, right? It's almost like a Pandora's box for them, which is why we need a solution, because these questions are being asked. People, and I know we had a long chat about this, and maybe we can talk about this, but there's nowhere to necessarily find these answers. Travel risk management will say, ISO 31030 will say, you need to have a place within your organization that this information is readily available for people to be able to find it. Just telling them to go and sort it out themselves is not enough. But this is what we've done for years. We've absolutely made it the responsibility of the traveller. We've not considered that some people don't want to out themselves in certain situations. Some people don't even know what the risks are to be going somewhere. So they're kind of doing it without realizing. And the safety aspect, I think, even just we can both kind of hone on the women traveller piece. There's nothing that really tells us what a hotel is like or an accommodation from that perspective. So we have to then think, okay, now I need to request. I want to be on a certain floor. I want this to happen. And then you have issues that, that go through all of that. So, but before we talk about that side of it, because that's kind of how we met and what we were talking about. But before we get too much into that, I want to take it back a step, because this information isn't readily available. What are people doing? They're going onto Google, right? And they're asking these questions. So you did a lot of research into that, didn't you, when you were looking into this? Can you tell us some of the stuff that people are asking that they just can't find out for them through their companies?
Yeah, so I think it's, as I said, it's to do with this data gap, and people are going to places like Reddit and Facebook and TikTok. And I guess to cover it with one broad brush, what is missing is the value of lived experience. So you have some types of data that cover some types of things, but not how people have actually experienced a place, which I think really influences. So we look for reviews on various other things, restaurants, how clean is it? Is the food good, etc. We don't really have that in terms of safety. And I think it's particularly as women, we naturally form these communities and kind of share amongst ourselves because of the, additional perceived risk and additional actual risk as well that we experience. And I think that's something that's really missing. So even, on fair enough, on the individual sort of personal travel side, that in particular, but business travelers as well are looking for places like TikTok and Reddit because they can't find the personalized information that they need, particularly, again, if they belong to one or more demographic groups. And when we start talking about the intersectionality of identities, it gets even more complex, because then you have to kind of take, okay, so for me as an example, I look at the stuff for women and then I'm go, okay, is that okay for Black women? And then I also have, with my ADHD, sensory processing stuff that goes on. So I have to kind of look at, am I going to be in a place where I'm going to be really crowded and I can't see an exit, for example, or, what kind of experience am I going to have there? It just helps me to prepare and feel more comfortable, or gives me the information that I need to say, right, actually, I'm not comfortable doing this. However, if I do it this way, perhaps this would be a better experience for me. And I think that's something that's really missing from travel experience as a whole.
I completely agree. So I'm going to say the sentence that I've said so many times across this podcast, which is travel data is not just lines on a spreadsheet. Each one of those lines on a spreadsheet is a lived experience. And we are terrified to go and ask the questions about that lived experience. We just don't put the mechanisms in place as corporates to do that. So again, we're talking about the standard. It's about this idea of continuous improvement. I'll do a shout out to one of my clients because I know he'll be listening, and I'm literally banging on about this to him all of the time. This idea of near misses, actually being able to have a conversation with your team member and understand what could have happened, what might have happened, as well as preparing them then for understanding that region from their perspective. The only way we're going to get this information before you've created all of the information you've created is by talking to people, right? And understanding that lived experience is really important to both the organization, but to also other people. I don't think I've shared this before, but I very rarely write reviews on anything. I'm a nightmare. Like, I just don't do it. I've got too much other stuff to do, and I just don't do it. Wrong generation, unfortunately. But I did once, because I was going to Ghana, and I stayed at this particular hotel. It was a boutique hotel that the agency I was working for booked. And it was absolutely incredible. The hotel was beautiful, really small, but I felt so safe. And I felt really looked after for the entire time that I was there. And I was conscious about I'd never been there before. I'm a female traveler. And I just, the only review I've ever written, literally. And TripAdvisor were like, please write more, because I think it's had to date something like 250,000 views, because of the fact that it was specific about a property, and people were then obviously asking about that region or whatever. And you're right, that it's just not there. So we end up asking our friends, we ask colleagues. These conversations are all happening, but we're not then collecting that data and putting it somewhere that we can then all access and kind of work from. And I guess in doing that, understand the risks, make our programs stronger off the back of it, and ensure that we're doing that kind of continuous improvement and moving it forward. I'm all in. You can tell, can't you? I have been from day one on this.
Side of that, though, as well, it puts pressure onto the hotels and organizations themselves as well to make improvements, because again, if these reviews, etc., are all segregated, it's all word of mouth or buried in all of the other reviews of other things, and how do they know that they need to make changes as well? Or, the ones that perhaps wouldn't want to, it puts more pressure on them to have to do something, because ultimately impacting the bottom line is the way sometimes that you have to get people to do stuff. Sometimes it's a bit of a stick.
100%. I think it's the only way. It's what we're teaching all the time. It's making those calculations and working out what the cost is to the business of either doing nothing or having a situation where you've not put the controls in place that you need to. I think that's exactly what travel risk management is. It's how we're saving the company money by the bad things not happening, because when something really bad happens, my goodness, are you going to know about it? Like, we're talking millions if something really awful happens. Now, it's rare, thank goodness, but we're asking companies to just get prepared for that. And I think to start understanding that, and again, we talk about this quite a lot, you've got so many different generations within a business now. You've got so many different experiences. You've got people who have worked in businesses for 40, 50 years, and they're still used to the old ways of doing things and just getting sorted on their own, and they don't want any support. And then you've got the kind of other extreme, which are much younger travelers who are much more connected than they've never ever been, but perhaps aren't necessarily experienced in the way of how to handle certain situations, or actually just what to look out for, because every country in the world has its challenges. And every group and every person has its challenges. Add into the fact that then you've got this transient piece as well of how you're feeling, whether you're ill, all of these things that aren't with you all the time, but then can also add more stress onto the trip. And you just want to be able to find this information out easily. So we've talked a little bit about, obviously, your why, because you recognize from your situation, but let's get into that in a bit more. Maybe we'll talk about, the experiences to what brought us together as well, if that's good for you.
Yeah. Where to start? So I have been traveling for about 10 years, maybe just over now. That's solo travel, do a lot of solo travel, and also business travel from my time working in corporate. So I have experience on kind of both sides of the fence with this. And I think it's something that I've just spent so much time researching when I'm looking to go places, particularly when I was a new traveler, never been anywhere before. And, the concerns around, particularly in places like Europe, actually, racism, what's my experience going to be like here? Is it safe for me as a woman? The risk of sexual assault is always, ever present, for us. And then to add the layers on top of it. And it was just kind of, I guess, the time spent doing the research. Can you trust these people? What sort of mindset were they in at the time? Am I aggregating the right kinds of information? And as I said, going to the couple of different pockets and bringing it all together and going, well, I've had to spend so much more time than I think the average time for a cisgender white man to do research is like under 4 hours end to end.
Wow.
Whereas for women, it's 10, which, and that's, as an average. So there'll be, I guess people that are more cautious and have, again, when we were talking about intersectionality of identities, So, perhaps people from different religions or different sexualities, etc., would be also counted in that men group. So this is just showing why it's important to separate out these identities. Because for some, it could be, half an hour, they just book it and go. But that's never or very rarely the case for women and people from different groups. So started looking into it a bit more whilst I was traveling, speaking to people as well, and just kind of trying to understand their experiences. Were they like mine? And particularly for women, a lot of them were. Something I posted about quite a bit on LinkedIn and had, good traction where people have been explaining, their experiences with safety. And the post that brought us together was when I was staying in a hotel for work, and there was a mess up with the check-in. They hadn't checked me into the room on the system. And so I was asleep in my bed and my door was open from the outside whilst it was locked internally, but it didn't have a bar lock. So I had a security guard that I was screaming at in my bedroom at midnight.
Of course.
But again, the way that it wasn't just that happened. I understand accidents happen. Should it have? Absolutely not, because the correct policies and procedures should have been in place in the first place. Operationally, tech fails. So what do we do when it's not working? I think, it's something that's really important, and staff training and that sort of thing. But I think the other part of that is how it was handled afterwards. It was very much brushed under the carpet. It was, this never happens, but the response that I got from the post that I had put on LinkedIn shows that it really does happen, and it happens quite frequently. There were people that had said, this has happened to me a few times, which it should never happen once. It was horrifying. And, you've got no sense of what the person's intention is coming into your room in the moment. As it happened for me, it was a security guard. So, okay, it was fine. But as you were talking about near misses, if I hadn't done the extra lock on the inside, the guest that had the key would have been able to get in themselves. And I don't know them. They could be anyone. So, that was a particularly not great one. So from there, again, started talking to other people about what they do to prepare themselves to feel safe. So on top of that research, it's things like bringing door stops and barricading doors with ironing boards and hangers and things that make noise. And I understand that there is some responsibility to, act sensibly and keep yourself safe. But ultimately, if you're paying hundreds of pounds to stay in a hotel, I really think that, they have a responsibility to make sure that you're taken care of and you're safe. Where does their sort of duty of care end as well?
100%. And there is. So the hotel listening, please, yes, you do have a responsibility as well. There you are. Hundreds of pounds we're paying, hundreds of pounds per night in some cases. Yeah, 100.
Yeah, this is a lovely hotel. This is a very nice hotel in central London. I was down to do some work down there. So, you expect at that point, and I understand that they have these new locks now. They've stopped doing a lot of places this double bar lock, but it just goes to show that ultimately women feel a lot less safe with them because we can't make sure that we're protected.
The other thing that I thought about when I was, obviously, again, when I'm in hotels myself, I'm always looking around things. I've also had an experience, which is again exactly why we talked, and I'm sure I've talked about it on another podcast, but just for the record, it was at my event. So the irony that I was running a travel risk event at the time that it happened, there were a few drinks in the bar for the night before. I actually didn't drink, went to bed fairly early, and then about 2.5 hours later, in came the night porter with, as it happened to be, one of my guests from the event. So it wasn't like I didn't know the person, but that fear, that moment of when it happened, and actually like the humiliation for the guy as well. I felt really like he was like, he was really embarrassed. I think it was a new job for him. He didn't want to get into trouble from his bosses. Like, I really felt for him. I managed to just about control myself to him, and then I let the reception staff have it downstairs at about 12:30, because again, and I've talked about this, I'm sure, with people and maybe on the podcast, but it just does my head in that you're in this case, we had an event. Like, why did the reception staff not know why we had an event, what the event was for? Come on, like, up your game, even in that moment. Like, it was the worst time for it to happen. But I can 100% say, I believe that something like this is happening on a daily basis around the world without a shadow of a doubt, and we're just not talking about it. And there are some great stories. We're doing some stuff on the podcast about this that we've been starting to look at on LinkedIn, and we're putting some stuff out there around through my other companies, because I just feel like we need to raise the bar on this thing particularly. Like when you are asleep in your hotel room, you are literally at your most vulnerable on a trip. You couldn't be, well, I say you couldn't be more vulnerable. Potentially you could in ground transportation when you're out and about. But from a perspective of somebody accessing your room, you're asleep, right? So you couldn't be. And the expectation is that you should not have to put a chair up against the door or learn. I saw some really cool thing on LinkedIn where someone showed you something really cool with it the other day. And I was like, great, but we shouldn't have to know that. And yes, you're right. We do have a responsibility to ourselves, but this idea, and this is what really incensed me when I was talking to you, was the lack of respect, feedback, or we're going to do anything about it from the property when you raised the issue. This idea of brushing it under the proverbial carpet, which is very anecdotal when we're talking about a hotel. But the idea that we pretend this never happens, we don't talk about all of this stuff, get real. We know it does. You know from your post, I know from talking to women all of my career as well, and men, not just women that it happens to. There's some horrendous statistics out there that are that over 50% of housekeeping staff, over 50%, between 50 and 60%, depending on the country, have been sexually assaulted by either a guest or a member of their team within a hotel. Like, this stuff is happening without a shadow of a doubt. And it's time for us to start kind of getting out there and talking about it. So I was angry. Did they ever come back to you with anything other than that? Like,
yeah, so I emailed the board of directors and,
my girl,
the complaint there. And they did a review. I got a very nice stay in a suite. It was lovely. But I still don't feel that on the policy side of things, like, that was great. I got to take my mum to the West End. It was lovely. But, I couldn't say that I feel with any kind of confidence that that's not going to happen again. The fact is, yes, it was a technology fault, but tech fails all the time. What's in place. And I think the other problem with this is that, not tackling this means that people are taking the choice between physical safety and fire safety into their own hands as well. So if you're barricading the door, you're bringing a doorstop, etc. If there's a fire, how are you getting out? Rubber melts. It's one of those things that kind of go.
It's the same for me as people are like now being advised to take carbon monoxide alarms with them when they're traveling. And I'm just like, I get it. Like, please do. I'm not suggesting you don't. I'm an absolute advocate for it. But we shouldn't have to be doing that, especially in hotels. Like, okay, maybe an Airbnb and an apartment, 100 different. But a hotel, come on. I think it's difficult for properties to get a hold of this, but I think it's been something that we've all been talking about for a really long time. So it's not new. It's something that, like I say, is happening regularly. There's been sexual assault cases, like in both of our cases, right? We got away pretty unscathed. It was fine. It was a shock, but it was fine. But there's been people being raped in these situations, again, by guests, by hotel staff, or by another guest, because they've been able to access rooms. Like, we're not training properly. We're not empowering people to know what they should and shouldn't be doing, but more so the staff. We should be creating a culture of safety. Like, hotels, by their very nature, are welcoming to people, but they need to be safe and secure. Otherwise, what is going on? See, I knew this would be a passionate one for us. Okay, so is that part of what your tool is going to help with? Is it people are going to be able to have a look at properties and safety and stuff? How is that? Or they're going to talk about stuff? How is it all envisioned to work?
Yeah, so it's going to be a piece of it, because obviously there needs to be. The problem is that, again, talking about the gaps in the data, those structures need to be put into place in the first place to be able to pull on that. So yes, we can get what we need to get from lived experiences and actual hard data. Like, it can't just be everything's lived experience. But even being able to see that, this has happened to 5 people in our hotel, in this hotel in the last, couple of months or whatever time period it is, being able to access that information, access the trends, and then being able to approach them and say, look, this is what's happening. This is the size of the market. Women are struggling with this particularly, and now they can see. Because I think the problem is there's no reporting. So hundreds, thousands of people could go through that and nobody would know, because it said, the pieces don't speak to each other. So yes, it's about being able to pull the trends and information together to then be able to lobby to create change in the industry itself as well. Prevention is great, being able to give people informed consent on information, allow them to make informed decisions is great, but also, like I said, the emphasis is also on the organisations themselves to make a change, and without the data, we can't make that happen.
100%. And this is why, again, we've connected. I think it's a connection of passions here, but also the desire for change, right? So that we've been doing some work. The podcast knows we've been doing some work as the TRA, but just again, for the benefit of everyone listening, this is why we've put together our group of travel managers. We've looked to see whether we can address this, and we've created a sort of minimum level of conformity, a minimum standard, if you like, for safety and security. Working with a platform to actually being able to enable that, so properties don't have to do this thousands of times for each customer they're working with, because that's the headache. It's a nightmare for them. It's expensive, but technology is at play now that is absolutely changing everything. And this is why I wanted to get Jade on. This is why I've talked to lots of other people over the years of this podcast, because we have to kind of let some of these players into the room to actually have a different way of thinking about stuff, like doing the way that we've always done it when it comes to safety and security as travel vendors. I hate to say this to you, but it isn't working. We're not doing our travelers fair justice, and we are not. And just this idea of like, well, it doesn't happen often, or it just happens again. That one person it happens to, it will be potentially, hopefully not life transforming, but it absolutely could be for all of the wrong reasons. But it will certainly be an impact that they'll remember, and they'll talk about it. And again, they'll be talking about you for the wrong reasons. So those properties that really want to kind of say, we understand duty of care and we really want to kind of do something, this is something you can really get hold of now to differentiate as we move away from assuming that everything's okay. I'm sitting here telling you it's not all okay. Jade has done a shed load of research. She's telling you it's not all okay from her lived experience. We need to think about things differently. And of course, it's not just accommodation, is it? It's ground transportation. It's what to do in cities. It's all of that stuff. We're just kind of honing on one particular part of it, because I hope that's something that we can do together, part of the wider group, and actually really kind of get behind this. So we are intending to do stuff. So you're going to hear more from us on this, everybody. So we're not going away, and we're not going to be quiet about it anymore. Something needs to be done. So just with that in mind, thinking about perhaps your golden nuggets, because we always kind of end the podcast thinking about what advice we can give to people. So I don't know how you want to position this, whether you're going to be doing it to travelers or actually people, perhaps companies thinking about this stuff. I'm going to stop talking. It's over to you.
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think for the moment, one of them would be just take a minute to consider who you have on your team, and perhaps that their experiences might just be a little different to yours. I love that, people are a lot more inclusive these days, and, creating, giving opportunities to people. If they don't feel safe to take part in those opportunities, then actually there's a kind of gap there whereby opportunities are missed because, people don't feel safe necessarily taking them. So just consider who you have in your team. Maybe it's a conversation, maybe it isn't, but, do a little research and just see how their experience might be a little different than yours.
Absolutely. This is essential. It's the best way to start, right? And it's what we talk about generally with travel risk management. You can't start building your program until you start talking to the stakeholders. And your stakeholders are your travelers as well. We keep forgetting about that in travel risk management policy processes. And your travelers are all different. What we're really talking about here is people risk management. And if you're going to understand your people and support them, then you need to know what's going on. So yes, this idea of just taking a step back and having a consideration to who is in your team, it doesn't mean you have to go all out and start asking questions straight away. And you probably want to be a bit sensitive about that anyway, right? There is a time and a place. We're not going to do that in a meeting in front of everybody. But to have those, to begin to know how to have those conversations is helpful. So could you give us support on that? What some good questions to ask if you are going to kind of talk to people within your team?
Yeah, I mean, you make a really good point, and it's difficult. It's a tough question, a tough conversation to have, I think, without singling people out. I think you called out very well there. don't do it in a meeting in front of everybody. But perhaps when you've done that kind of consideration, do a bit of research and see, like, for example, a place might not be so friendly to a type of person. So maybe then just have a conversation with them and say, look, I understand from my research that this may be a cause of concern. I wanted to make sure that you feel taken care of. It's not about limiting opportunities, etc. Just making sure that we can provide what you need to be able to do your job well.
As an enabler, right? Because this is the
Yes.
thing we bang on about it all the time. Travel risk management should be seen as an enabler. We want to ensure that we're giving everybody the same opportunities, but we're allowing them to feel safe in doing so. And also, if they don't want to, for whatever reason, there's a mechanism to allow them not to as well. And at the moment, none of this stuff is there. We talk about the missing data. This is another whole area. We just don't have conversations with people. We seem to be very scared to have conversations with people. And these conversations do happen. I can assure you they happen. Well, when we were in the office, they used to happen at the water machine or something like that. Now they happen on WhatsApp, potentially in your own groups that no one knows as a company that you've got, because you've got friends. And they are talking. We've got to just learn how to make that a safe place to talk and bring it back into the program.
Yeah, or if you don't feel comfortable approaching, it might not be that the relationship is there. I mean, I guess there's a lot of sort of judgment calls to be made there, but create an open space where people feel comfortable to be able to come and talk to you about it. You can mention it more generally and just say, if anyone has any concerns, please do come and talk to us about it. That's something you've created an open dialogue there, and then it's up to the person if they want to approach or not. Again, it's a judgment call. But I think it's really important to remember, and this is part of, I guess, maybe my point number 2, is it's a collective responsibility between, the travellers, the organisations, and also the industry to actually be able to make this work, because it's important. So I guess it's easy for us all to sit and point fingers, but unless we all work together to do it, it's not going to work.
100%. You can see why she's a mentor for the TRA, can't you? She's exactly... You are exactly there, Jade, with that exact ethos. And that's what we feel responsible for, because we're representing the industries, and the industries can do better. They can definitely do better. And I think when it comes to duty of care, safety and security, looking after your travellers, this should be moving beyond a tick box exercise. This should be moving into a personalised customization. If you can personalise because you want to know what they want to spend on, you can personalise to know what they need to feel safe and secure on. And that's a call out again to the properties, and other travel companies, because we're really interested in personalisation. I can assure you, from a sales perspective, why are we not then taking this from a duty of care perspective? Because that data is so valuable, and if people feel safe, they will buy again. Like I don't know quite why we've not quite made the connection with all of this yet, but hopefully we will with conversations like this. So how can people get in touch with you if they want to get involved? What do you need from my listeners?
Yeah, you can contact me on LinkedIn. My name is Jade Oakley, or through the We Move Travel website, so wemovetravel.com. Also happy to receive emails, so jade@wemovetravel.com. Like, really interested in having just more conversations around, I guess, how legacy systems work. I think it's difficult as a newcomer into the industry. Had some really good conversations with a lot of people, but it's always good to kind of still try and understand what we're trying to adapt from as many different perspectives as possible. And also, if you have perspectives on experiences that you've had as a traveller that you think could be useful in how we're sort of building our risk models, that would be great as well. I'd love to have some conversations about that. And if you're just interested in what we're doing, please do reach out. I'm very friendly.
So I have an expectation that all of the mentors and ambassadors will be reaching out to you at some point, because they're all they obviously love anything that's in this space and new and innovative. For those people that are willing to share stories, like, this is important now. Like, we really are trying to, it's always been important, but we're really trying to build solutions out now that are more than they've been before. We're really trying to put people at the absolute heart of everything that we do within travel risk management. This is not just high risk, kidnap, ransom. It's not. It's so far removed from that. It is around looking after your people, whoever they are, wherever they are, and whatever they are doing. And Jade, I'm just like, hats off to you. Like, we've had loads of chats about being female founders and how difficult all of that stuff is, and you just kept going and going and going. And I just wish you absolutely every ounce of luck, and I will be with you all the way. All that's left for me to say today is thank you to everybody for listening. You've been listening to Jade Oakley from We Move Travel. One to watch, please get in touch. My name is Travel with Bex, also known as Bex Deadman. You've been listening to Talk'n TRM podcast. I look forward to speaking to you again in a couple of weeks. And in the meantime, take care.